Okay, hello everyone and welcome to this Geography Education Online workshop today. I'm joined by David Morgan, who is Education Development Officer at the Field Studies Council. He's going to be leading the session today all about embedding GIS into enquiry. So we're going to be talking about how to find secondary data to support the development of questions, incorporating GIS into your methodology and into your data presentation and analysis. There is a live chat box alongside the stream, so if you have any questions throughout today, please leave them there and David and I will answer them at the end. You will also get an email tomorrow morning with a recording of this session. So if you want to watch again, you can do, and the slides from the session will be available on the GEO website as well. I'll hand over to David now, and I hope you all enjoy.
Fantastic. Thank you, Harriet. So welcome. So as Harriet says, today's sort of tutorial session is all about kind of embedding GIS within geographic inquiry. So that today is going to kind of focus mainly on the individual investigation, or the independent investigation, but kind of have applications across all of sort of geographical inquiry. So kind of moving. There we go. Move on through the slides. So as Harriet said, you might want to kind of have a notepad and stuff to jot things down. You can get hold of the slides. They are on the GEO website, and there's a couple of points at which it might be useful. If you've got those slides on hand, you might want to sort of work on those slides as we go, and I'll kind of highlight where they are. If you haven't got them live, you might decide that you want to sort of go back to those sections and use them with the slides as a sort of handout kind of model at a later date. So that's absolutely fine, and they're there. And before we get into the content, apologies in advance. We may have some interruptions from my two kind of canine housemates. It's the exciting point in the day when people start to get home from school next door and all sorts of stuff happens. So if we do get interrupted by these pair, I'm very, very sorry. I will try and mute and shut them up as quickly as possible. But unfortunately, they don't have a mute button. So apologies in advance in case these two interrupt us. So kind of as Harriet said, a lot of this session is me thinking about how we can incorporate and use GIS and spatial data throughout the whole of your individual investigation. So kind of traditionally and historically, we might sort of think, well, GIS, that's part of our data presentation. We can use that to create ourselves some really nice sort of professional or pretty looking maps in our data presentation, help us with our analysis and those kind of bits and pieces. But I think hopefully by the end of this session, you'll sort of see some opportunities for GIS to help you kind of start out, to come up with a question, to identify a sort of a title and design a methodology, and then incorporate GIS into your data presentation, your analysis, and your evaluation as well. So hopefully we'll kind of find some opportunities throughout the whole inquiry process where GIS can really add value. What we're not going to do, and I'll kind of just skip back slightly for this, I'm not necessarily going to cover how to do lots of things. So this won't, you kind of might not go away from this this tutorial with lots of, I know exactly how to make the map that I need to make for my data presentation. Hopefully you might have some ideas and some inspiration of kind of where you might want to create that map, what that map might look like, but you might have to go elsewhere to find sort of instructions or help with actually creating that map in GIS or doing some of those things. And I'll try and signpost some of those locations as well. So some of those places that you can get kind of help and support with the how to. I guess this is more the sort of why to, the why you might want to, and less about the kind of nitty gritty and the nuts and bolts of sort of button clicking to get to the how bit. So before we get into any of that, I want to start with a little kind of example, a little kind of sort of case study. Why bother? Why use GIS? Where does all this come from? What might spatial data kind of fit within my work? And that big statistic at the top is something that, as a geographer and as kind of all of us really, I guess, might see from time to time. 80% of all data is geographic. I have no idea how true that is. I haven't referenced that statement, but it's one of those kind of, maybe it's an urban myth. It's something that you kind of hear around and about quite often. As an enthusiastic geographer, you might kind of look at that and go, okay, that means that 80% of all data is geography, which again may or may not be true, and perhaps sort of depends on kind of how you use it, what you do with it. But I'm just going to kind of pose a question to you at the start. So type stuff away in the chat box, in the comments box. I will see it, but I might see it slightly delayed. So I might have kind of 10, 20 seconds before I see the stuff that you're typing. But what geographic data do you create? Do you make? Do you kind of is created? And what geographic data maybe do you use on a daily basis? So if this fact is correct, if this statement that 80% of all data is geographic, where is that coming from and what are we doing with it? Where does it go? How does it kind of manifest itself in our lives, in our world? How are we making it? What are we doing with it? Any of those kind of thoughts. So I'll go quiet for a moment. I'll give you a chance to maybe type something in the chat box, and I'll see if some of those appear. So I guess some of the geographic data that we're creating, we might not even realize we are creating. We're probably certainly not setting out to create geographic data. But if you use a loyalty card, like a Nectar card in the supermarket, that's going to create some geographic data. It's going to tell Nectar or whoever your loyalty card might be is how much, what you buy, what sort of stuff you buy, how much stuff you spend, or how much money you spend, what sort of things you spend your money on, and where you go shopping. So it knows where you live, it knows where you shop, all of those kind of things. Similarly with your Oyster cards, it knows where you get on the tube, where you get off the tube, the sort of journeys you make, the times of day you make those journeys. You might use geographic data in a completely different way. It might be your McDonald's app that tells you where your nearest McDonald's is, or your Just Eat or whatever it might be that tells you where the nearest place you can get takeaway pizza could be from. Maybe that's a quite valuable and useful in lockdown. Where can I get delivery food from? Cool. So as geographers, kind of information about places is really key to us as people who are doing geography, people who are asking and answering geographic questions. We can use it to Uber, great example of kind of both using and creating geographic data, just one that kind of popped in there. So we use information to kind of build a picture of the world around us, the people, the processes within a landscape, whether it's an urban landscape, a rural landscape, a purely natural landscape, a human landscape, whatever it might look like. And I just want to kind of give you a little example that I've used in a couple of places of how we could maybe turn some fairly dull looking data, some spatial data, into a sort of geographic series of thinking that leads us perhaps to a question. So there exists, and I chose this example because I have a colleague who has a strange interest in bus shelters. He collects photos of bus shelters. I won't even go into perhaps why he does that, but he has this kind of strange hobby where he collects photos of bus shelters. So when I first kind of found this data set, I thought it would be fun to use, kind of because he has this hobby. So this is part of the National Public Transport Access Nodes dataset. It's an open dataset made by the government, and it is the location, or it contains the location of every place you might get onto public transport in Great Britain. I kind of took that, and actually I was only really interested in bus shelters because he's not interested in train stations, stuff like that. So I pulled out of there the bus shelters or the bus stops. And specifically, I looked when I got kind of involved in this, at bus stops in one area. But we've got a spreadsheet full of bus stops. What makes this spreadsheet spatial data, or data that's kind of geographic? Well, there's something in there, or there's various things in there that tell us where these bus stops are. Every bus stop has got a code that means nothing to us. We don't really care, but we know what road it's on. We know the town or the city it's in, maybe the area of that town or city. And we know two really important, really valuable bits of information about each of those bus stops: their latitude and their longitude. So we can locate every single one of those bus stops on the surface of the Earth in quite high resolution, high kind of detail. And as a geographer, that kind of gets me a bit curious. I start to think, oh, where are those bus stops? And I went to a place that I knew pretty well, the town that I grew up in. And I thought, oh, let's map all the bus stops in the town I grew up in. And I did. So I plotted every one of those bus stops from that spreadsheet in Burton-on-Trent, and I plonked them on a map. So every purple dot is a bus stop. You can see in some places there's two really close together, where there's maybe one on each side of the road. And kind of perhaps unsurprisingly, lots of them follow the sort of arterial routes into the town, but others kind of weave their way around, maybe around housing estates or things like that. So I looked at the bus stops and I noticed there's a bit of a pattern there. There's bits of that map that have fewer bus stops than others. There are some areas of the map, like up here in the northwest of the town, where there are loads of bus stops, a really high density of bus stops. Down sort of to the east of the railway line, there are far fewer bus stops. So, okay, I wonder why that is. That's a bit odd. I never realised that was a thing. And then I started to think, I wonder if where your bus stop is kind of has an impact on what your life is like. And I started to think, okay, how far might you want to travel to get to your nearest bus stop? And I decided maybe you want to walk. You're not going to drive to your nearest bus stop, not if you live in a town. If you live in a rural area, you might kind of drive your kids to the nearest bus stop so they can head into town, because it's better than driving them into town. But you probably won't. Most people in a town don't want to drive to their nearest bus stop. They want to walk to the nearest bus stop. And for convenience, they probably don't want to walk much more than 5 minutes to their nearest bus stop. So I created a kind of a layer. I asked a question. I made a buffer based on all of those bus stop locations to show me where are the places within 5 minutes walk of the bus stops. And I didn't worry too much about this stuff that was to the east of the river, out of town in a kind of separate settlement. I was focusing just in Burton. So I focused on the stuff that was to the west of the River Trent. And I thought, okay, I wonder if that has a connection on kind of people's access to transport. Are you more or less likely to have a car if you live near bus stops, or are the areas where there aren't bus stops areas where people don't really need bus stops because everybody owns a car? There's really high car ownership. So I started to sort of pulled in a bit of census data and I started to look for patterns in there. So kind of quite quickly in a little series of thinking from bus stops, I got to a kind of whole series of questions about perhaps social inequality, about access to transport, about ability of people to move around, to commute for work, to access different services and things like that. So very quickly, I've gone from a quite bland looking spreadsheet with bus stops in, not very interesting, through to a whole load of questions about social inequalities across an urban area. I know that they're kind of, my little bit of knowledge of urban land use models tells me that quite often transport routes are important in that. Maybe industry is important in where I get different groups of people living in different kind of levels of deprivation or inequality. So I started to kind of, maybe I could find myself a question in there. Maybe I could find myself a sort of story in there. And I've started with some spatial data. I've added in some more spatial data, and I've ended up with perhaps a question that tells me something about, or leads me into more questions about kind of social inequality. And I've done that all really quickly and all really easily using GIS, which is kind of where we're headed with most of this talk. So what is GIS? I guess it's a kind of 3-letter phrase that we, in geography now, we use fairly regularly, fairly frequently, and it's quite nice to work out and sort of develop a kind of common understanding of what we mean by that. So a geographic information system really is a tool that helps us ask and answer geographical questions. And in the kind of simplest, a GIS can capture data. It's a system that might be able to capture data, to store data, to manipulate data, analyze, manage, and display data. And particularly spatial data is the thing that makes GIS special and really useful to us as geographers. And as a student carrying out some fieldwork or an inquiry, you are an integral part of that geographical information system. Often we think about GIS and a geographic information system as just the computery bits. There's like some softwarey bits, but actually we're part of the system. We are doing the data collection. We're a key part of that data collection process in the system, part of that input. We're part of the processing of the data, the kind of questioning, the thinking in there, and sort of asking and analysing and applying knowledge to the results. So GIS is relatively modern. It's maybe 60 years old, but this kind of process, this way of thinking, isn't that new. We could do all of this stuff. We could create ourselves, a GIS, a geographical information system that works in an entirely paper-based system. But technology can make our life a lot easier. In my map that I had just now, I'm creating those 5-minute travel time buffers from all of my bus stops would be much harder and much slower if I had to do it in a paper-based system. So a software-based, a computer-based system makes life much, much easier. And it also gives us access to kind of secondary data, authoritative data sets, government data sets, things like that. A whole range of scales, gives us the ability to map data quickly, to kind of ask a question and go, oh no, that wasn't quite the right question. I'll ask that again in a different way. I'll sort of map that in a different way, and gives us a whole load of powerful tools at our fingertips. And that's really powerful for geographical inquiry. And hopefully you'll kind of see by the time we get to 5 o'clock tonight, at a whole load of different stages of geographical inquiry. So hopefully the diagram I get on the right of this might be relatively familiar to people. If not those colours and that shape, then those words and that kind of process of starting with an introduction, doing some planning, some thinking, designing methods, collecting data, presenting data, analysing data, concluding and evaluating. So our kind of general and sort of fairly typical geographical inquiry process. The one on the left is perhaps might be less familiar to you if you're a student. Your teachers might be aware of it and have seen this kind of model. So this is a model of inquiry learning, really, and geographical investigation inquiry is part of that. And the kind of key thing with this, I think, within an individual investigation, you might do one loop through this. You might you'll only write one introduction and plan it once. You'll create one set of methods. You'll do some data collection once. You'll do one kind of lap around there. But one lap around here might involve several laps around this one. That process of introduction and planning, of designing your, of coming up with a question, might involve a couple of loops around this process. You might use some data, do a bit of kind of problem solving analysis with that data, querying it, reflecting on that then leads you to ask more questions, that then lead you to look at more data. So you might do a few laps of this even within the kind of stage of your introduction and planning. And I think that's really good practice, and that's really really a powerful thing to do in terms of getting to a good, well-formed introduction and a plan. So what role can GIS play in that? Well, I guess for me, the role of GIS kind of depends really on where you're starting from. When I sort of sit back and look at this, broadly speaking, I would say that every student who's setting out at the start of an individual investigation is starting roughly in one of two places. There's maybe a kind of third one of these that is, I have absolutely no idea what I want to do. And that's fine. But eventually you might plump for something, or someone might push you towards something or encourage you to something. You're either going to start at a point of, well, I know where I've got to do it, but I don't know what I'm going to do. Or you know what you're interested in, but you don't know where to do it. Those are your kind of two opposite starting points. So it might be that you have your local area to play with. That's the area that you've got to investigate, but you don't know what topic or what theme. Or it might be that you've got a theme in mind. You're really interested in carbon, or you're really interested in place, or whatever it might be. You've got yourself a topic, you've got a theme, but you don't know where's the best place in your local area or nationally to go and collect data for that topic or theme. So you might be starting in one of two places. And this for me is a kind of little thinking sort of process, depending where you're starting. That's maybe some of the questions you might ask yourself. So if I'm starting here on the left, I know where I'm going, but I don't know what I want to do. So I might start just by looking at a map. I'm not looking at any data sets necessarily. I'm just looking at a whole load of maps. Maybe they're Ordnance Survey maps, maybe they're Google Maps, maybe it's Google Earth, those kind of things, aerial photos. And I'm looking around and I'm trying to work out what geography might there be here. It might involve looking at newspaper cuttings, stuff like that as well. But what geography exists in this place? If you are looking at a town, then you're probably, your area is a town, then you're probably not going to be looking at, you might kind of filter out rural questions. Or if you are looking at an area without a river anywhere nearby, you're probably not going to look at flooding questions. There's no river or sea, so a flooding question isn't going to be one of my options. So you might be able to sort of filter out some and filter some topics in. So what general kind of topics could I be interested in? What could I find here? What geography is in this place? Then I might kind of dig a bit deeper. I might start to do a bit more research into my chosen topic in that chosen location. And that might kind of involve me to look at some secondary data, to maybe revisit some of my background theory, the stuff you've learnt about in class, and say, okay, does that work in that place? If what you're interested in is maybe inequality, and you look at some index of deprivation data, and you find that it's all about the same. Everywhere is in the 5th decile of the index of multiple deprivation, then maybe that's not a great place or a great topic. One of those two might have to change. You might have to find a place where there's more variation in index of deprivation, or you might go, well, I'm stuck in this place, I'm going to have to choose a different thing to look at, a different topic to look at. But I think you can kind of work your way around this sort of process wherever you're starting from. And again, you might have to take you might not be able to do it in one neat trip down to question. If you can, great, but you might have to kind of go around and sort of iterate a few times until you get to a question and a hypothesis that you're happy with. And the green bits in this sort of model, this flowchart, are maybe opportunities where I think kind of GIS might be useful, whether that's looking at secondary data sets, whether that's just looking at maps in general, whatever that might be. But I think those green areas are the kind of richest veins for where GIS might add value. This, I guess, is a kind of another way of sort of representing that. Two different kind of pieces of work that we've kind of written have two slightly different ways of sort of representing that. Probably both are useful to kind of use together. They're not necessarily very different, but in conjunction, you might find kind of either both of or one of those sort of useful for guiding your way through, helping you to find a question or kind of land a hypothesis. So doing both of those, following either of those two routes, the kind of questions-based one or that kind of flowchart-based one, needs secondary data. It needs data sets. It needs you to go out and find some secondary data that you can use to give some context to your question. Because a question without context tends to be quite a bit broad, a bit vague, possibly a little bit sort of generic. And generic questions tend to give generic answers, and they're not necessarily very interesting. So there are lots and lots and lots of sources for secondary data sets. Rather than give you a massive list here, if you go to that link there, you will find lots of different links through to secondary data sets sorted by topic area. So there's kind of questions there for rivers, or secondary data set sources for rivers, for carbon, for place, for a whole load of different topics and themes. So kind of rather than give you a massive list now, I'll give you a link to a place that you can find lots of them. The other place that's really useful is through ArcGIS Online. And there are kind of two routes to finding secondary data sets through ArcGIS Online, both of which are useful, but they are quite different. So the first way you can do it is within a map in ArcGIS Online. You can search for layers. You can add layer, which is the yellow with a little plus, add layer, search, and search within ArcGIS Online. And if you search for your search term, you will find loads of stuff. The thing with searching ArcGIS Online is that essentially it's a bit like YouTube for maps. So anybody with an ArcGIS Online account can publish something onto there. You'll all know from watching YouTube that when you go on YouTube, some of the videos you find are brilliant and some of them are terrible. And some of them are brilliant, but of no use to what you're interested in. And that's the case with searching ArcGIS Online. Some stuff you'll find is brilliant, and that's generally stuff with green ticks and with kind of blue globes. That sort of signifies that they're kind of authoritative, or they're curated data sets. Some of it will be made by John in Sweden with an ArcGIS Online account and will be of absolutely no use to you. So you need to use a little bit of discretion in finding the stuff that is valuable, is worthwhile, and is useful. The other place within sort of Esri's stuff is the Living Atlas of the World. And the Living Atlas of the World is a bit more like Netflix, in that someone has curated it. Someone has pulled it together and said that this stuff is good quality. It's got kind of quality control checks behind it. This secondary data is quality, and you could use it. So kind of two options there. Both are useful, but kind of be aware that one is more open, one is more curated, and that might kind of give you a sort of things to think about when you're accessing those secondary data sets. Okay, so I've used GIS. I found myself a question. I've got to that point that I've got a question. I've got hypotheses. I know what I'm doing. Now I'm thinking about my data collection. And hopefully you kind of got a plan for your data collection, but you're looking at how do I make my data collection sort of GIS ready? How do I collect data in such a way that it's easy to get my data into GIS later on? So the GIS we're going to talk about here really is ArcGIS Online, because it's really easy to use. It's accessible to schools. It's free for schools. So if your school doesn't know about that, then pester your teachers, or if you are teachers, pester yourselves and make sure you have access to that. So there's kind of two ways, really. Both ways, a little bit like my spreadsheet of bus stops earlier on, need some way of attaching it to a map. It needs a place bit. So the easiest way around of that is to capture yourself some place information, stick it in Excel, and then combine that with ArcGIS Online later. So the easiest thing you could do is every time you collect a piece of data, use a GPS app on your phone to capture the latitude and the longitude of that piece of data. So if it's pedestrian counts, use the GPS app on your phone, and you can if you've not got one that's kind of native, you can download lots. There's loads of choice to capture where is this as well. So where am I standing? What is the data I'm collecting? Pop that into a spreadsheet. And once you've made your spreadsheet, it has to be this order, by the way, kind of data down, variables across the top. So it has to be laid out in that kind of format. Save it in your spreadsheet, but save it not as a normal Excel file. Save it as one of these CSVs. So a CSV is a really simple Excel file format. So there's no formatting associated with your spreadsheet. It's just nice and simple and straightforward. And then once you've saved it as a CSV, go to arcgis.com, to ArcGIS Online, click on Map, and then this is really exciting. I have an animated GIF. So you just click on your CSV, drag it onto a map, and ArcGIS Online will find automatically and magically where all of your places that you collected data were. So just CSV, drag it onto the map, it will map those places. So you'll get a map with loads of dots all over it. And the other thing it will do, what it will try and do, is to map your data. I very quickly cancel it and tell it not to in here, but it will try and present your data. It will pick a variable in your data set and it will try and map that. But that little animated GIF thing there is happening all in real time. I'm not doing it now, but that's how quick it is. You make your spreadsheet, you make sure you've got a latitude and a longitude attached to it. You drag it and drop it onto a map, and that happens. So that's my data mapped. I could now start to think about presenting that data. I could think about kind of what I want to do with that map. I could ask questions of that data. So it's really easy to get your primary data onto a map. It is dead simple. The other way, if your school is all set up with ArcGIS Online accounts and things like that, is to use an app called Survey 123. So Survey 123 allows you to build a form, basically, a bit like you would have a paper recording sheet, but it's a digital recording sheet for your data collection. And you design it and customize it and create it. And you can then create data that instantly is GIS-able. It's dead simple. There are guides and kind of how-tos around the place. So again, I'm not going to kind of tell you all of the how-tos, but I'll give you a very, very quick sort of run through. So you get a choice when you start to create a survey, which is a little bit like the Alice in Wonderland sort of green pill, red pill. Which potion do I drink? Those kind of things. You want the left-hand side. If you take the right-hand side, it's a path to pain and hardship. If you take the left-hand side, it is easy and joy and works wonderfully. So you create a new survey, you give it a name. You have to give it some tags, but you name it. And then you have a whole sort of heap of different question types. So this is where you design the data that you're, or the form for collecting your data. So hopefully by this point, you've already decided what is the data I want, and what kind of format will that data come in. Is it going to be numbers? Is it an index? Is it numbers that could have decimals because it's a measurement of a pebble? Or is it always going to be a whole number because it's a score for how round my pebble is? Or it's a count of people. You never have a decimal point of pedestrian counts. Is it a question that I'm asking to people? So am I expecting an open answer, or is it a multiple choice answer? What's the data look like? And you use the different question types, and you build yourself up a little form. Once you've made your little form, you can send that to your phone, and you can go out and collect data in the field mapped to locations with your form. So very, very quickly, let's do a little kind of practical task. Let's go and collect some data. So the data that I want you to collect doesn't involve going outside. You should be able to collect this data from your window. So if you're sitting near to a window, you should be able to collect the data that I've got here. So there is a link to my little data collection form up here, or if you've got a QR code reader, you can just clip that and go to my very, very quick data collection form. So I will go quiet for a few minutes. If people have kind of questions or things to pop in the comments box while we're doing this, by all means do, and we'll try and answer some of those questions if there are any. But if not, I will go quiet for a few minutes. I'll pop myself on mute probably, and you can try and find that form online. So use the link, use the QR code, and collect yourself a little bit of data. There are only four things to collect, and you can do them all by looking out of your window. Okay, so hopefully you might have made that work. You might be out collecting data, or when I say out, looking out of your window, collecting some data as we speak. What I will do in just a moment is we'll kind of have a little look at where that goes and kind of how that data appears. So once you have gone out into the field, you collected data, you come back. And the wonderful thing about Survey 123 is that it takes all of that data you collect in the field, and if you're connected to the internet in real time, it will shoop your data up to the internet. If you're not connected to the internet in the field, when you get back home or to the classroom or to school or wherever, it will suck all of that data up to the internet, and you'll be able to have a look at your data. What I've got hopefully loading, but loading a little bit slowly for some reason, is my data set now from all of your work heading out to collect data. Let's just make sure you're awake. Hello. Are we working? There we go. Hey, and I know that at least one person today is collecting data because we were on 25 a minute ago. So we have definitely added a little bit more data to my data set for today. So when those bars stop going up and down, here we are. So I have some data. So it pulled together my data set, all of my records from today and from kind of previous days when I've used this survey are there. It makes them kind of pretty quick. Some pretty quick bits of data presentation for me, and I have a little bit of choice of what it does with that. So I can make pie charts, I can make little bar charts, I can get a quick look at my data. This might not be what I want to what I choose to do with my data. It might not be the kind of perfect way of presenting this data, but it does at least give me a little kind of a quick oversight, a quick view of my data as I'm collecting it today. So it's kind of a bit of a start. It gives me a little bit of an in to look at my data. It starts me off asking some questions. It might lead me into more questions. So it's pulled my data in. I can have a little bit of an explore of it. And if I want to access it and do some more stuff with it, I can go to the data tab, and there is my map with all of my data collected on it. So every one of these red dots is a place that someone's collected some data. This, because it's been from sort of online stuff like this, is all over the country. It might be much more local if it's your fieldwork, or it could look a bit like this if it was sphere of influence stuff. If we're asking about tourism, where would people come from to get to a certain place, and something like that, it might end up looking a little bit like this. But that gives me my data set. I can download it into a spreadsheet in Excel. I can open it in ArcGIS Online, and then I can kind of get really inventive and creative and sort of go to town with presenting that data, with doing stuff with it in a whole load of different ways. So it's really pretty quick and simple and easy to create ways of getting your field data, your primary data, into GIS. And once it's in GIS, you can use it on its own, alongside other bits of your primary data, or alongside bits of secondary data that you've got from various places. So you kind of got it into the same place as a lot of your secondary data, maybe the same place as all of your primary data. You can start to go to town with your data presentation and your analysis. And that's where we're going to kind of head for the last part of this talk, really, is to think about data presentation and analysis, and sort of the part that GIS can play within that. And I'm going to start with a sort of cautionary message, I guess. So GIS is great for your data presentation, but at the same time, GIS makes it really easy to do terrible data presentation. So I have here an example of what I think is some pretty terrible data presentation. I'm going to hold my hands up at the very, very start and say that I'm not offering this up as good. I'm offering this up as hopefully terrible data presentation. So why? Have a little bit of a sort of critique of this, looking at that map, looking at the data. So this is about counts of people aged 65 plus from the 2011 census within this area of Ipswich, I think it is. So looking at that, what's wrong with that? Counts of over 65 people in each of these output areas, these local areas within Ipswich. What's wrong with it? What would you change? How might you present this data differently if you were aiming for something that was better than terrible? So again, I'm going to go quiet for a little bit. I'll give you a chance in the comments box to add any kind of comments or thoughts there. What's wrong? What would you change? How might you do it differently? Okay, so I'll give a oh, there we go. So the colours are horrid. I quite agree. So there's no colour ramp there. There's no kind of scale of intuitively. Is yellow higher than purple? It would seem to be, and according to the scale, but kind of sensically and logically, there's no sort of rhyme or reason behind why yellow is higher than purple. So we might do that differently. We might kind of start with the same color, but going from a light shade for my 2 to 15s up to a dark shade for my higher value. So start staying with one color, maybe it's blue, and going from light blue to dark blue. So changing the sort of intensity of that color, I guess, or the shade of that color, rather than different colors. The size of the areas are, I can't even remember what these are. They're one of the census area output sizes. So they might not be the smallest. They might not be output areas. I really can't remember from when I made this what layer they are, but if we've got smaller areas, a higher resolution from smaller areas might be useful. But this is a pretty small bit of Ipswich, so I think they might be output areas from memory. They might be the smallest resolution of data that's available. But if there is a better one, you might want to use it. Brilliant, thanks, Michael. Exactly that kind of one we just said. So different shades of the same color would be clearer. Looking at the transparency of my colors here, so every color is kind of block solid. You can't see the map underneath, so maybe I want to make those a bit transparent so that I bring in the context of the map that's underneath there. Looking at these sort of age categories, so remember these were counts, and in my counts, because of the way that the computer, the GIS, has sort of automatically split them up, I've got a count from 54.7 people per area to 68. So that kind of decimal pointing of a person doesn't really make sense. This would probably make more sense as a piece of data presentation if they were percentages. So the percentage of the whole population within each of those areas, that might be more sensical. So there's kind of plenty of things there, hopefully, that you can see you might want to change to make that easier to see. So yeah, a choropleth map that uses sort of a normalized data set with a sort of shaded color ramp might well be a much better way of displaying that data. So there are kind of there are some benefits and some value in kind of doing your data presentation in GIS. It doesn't have to be for the individual investigation. Data presentation doesn't have to be done through GIS. What's more important, and this kind of comes out if we look at some of the sort of feedback from 2019 from the last marked sort of exam board marked sets of NEAs with individual investigations, kind of suggests that actually what's most important isn't what you use or how you make it, it's that it's appropriate. So kind of some kind of overarching sort of useful points there. Maybe use maps better to investigate your study area, but appropriate techniques are the most important ones. It doesn't really matter if they're hand-drawn or digitally created. They're both equally worthy of credit, but they should be appropriate. And that's the kind of key word we see all the way through the individual investigations, is that appropriateness. So would that map that I just presented to you be appropriate? Probably not. It would be pretty poor, I would say. They should be complete, and I should try and not do what I did with that map that I just made, that I just shared with you. Not use the default settings. And it's one of my massive bugbears. It's one of the things that comes out in, I can't remember which exam board it was, but someone I love kind of hates the proportional symbol, and particularly the orange proportional symbol in ArcGIS Online. Don't just use the default settings. There's probably something much better and much more appropriate that you can use. So in terms of working, well, how do I know what is appropriate? How do I know how I should make my map? And it's a tricky question because map making in cartography is so probably equal parts art and science. So there are rules, but equally it's a subjective process, and what someone says is a good map and a nice map carries a huge amount of subjectivity to it. So hopefully this kind of little sort of decision-making tree will help sort of steer you in the right direction. First off, it depends what you're mapping, doesn't it? Have I got points of data? Are these places where I put an infiltration ring into the ground and I've measured the infiltration rate of my soil? That would be a point. Are they lines? Are they looking at congestion of little sections of road, maybe? Or is it areas? Is it land use or census areas, things like that? So start off, what's the geography? What are the features you're mapping? Then think about, okay, well, what's the data that I've got look like? Is it categories? Are they numbers, but not necessarily numbers that kind of mean anything? So something like Powers index of roundness. You get a number and a 6 is rounder than a 1, but a 6 isn't twice as round as a 3. So they kind of, the order of them tells you something, but the number doesn't necessarily tell you anything useful about their scale or their relative difference. Numerical data, maybe it's measured pebbles. So I've taken the same pebbles that I've done Powers Index of roundness on, and I've measured the size of their a-axis, and I've got some numerical data. So thinking about the type of data that you've got, and combining those two bits of information will lead you through to, okay, so I know kind of what I should be doing here. If I've got areas, I've got numerical data, and it's normalized, it's turned to a percentage or a population density or something like that, then I can make myself a choropleth map. So using a sort of decision tree like this, and we often see sort of trees like this with statistics, using something like this is really valuable, is really useful in kind of guiding some of those decisions and avoiding some of those sort of bad mapping decisions. And it's worth sort of saying at this point that like those bad mapping decisions aren't just decisions that are, or aren't just problems that we have as students. They're problems that professionals have as well. A couple of slides ago in the notes, if you download the slides, there are links to 2 amazing, like brilliant blog posts by great cartographers about how different groups have been making terrible maps about coronavirus. So the BBC, the government, all of these people, you kind of, once you get into critiquing mapping, you'll watch the news and you'll watch the TV and you'll open your newspaper and you'll be like, that's an appalling map. That's terrible. It should look like this. They should have done that. They shouldn't have done that. Thinking about how you present your data can be a really valuable thing to do. We spend loads and loads of time planning our data collection, but we don't always put the same amount of effort into planning our data presentation. I think it's something we really that's really worthwhile doing, planning your data presentation, really thinking critically about how are you going to present your data, what colors might you use, do the colors you use carry some sort of meaning that make it easy or less easy to interpret your data. Am I presenting the raw data, or is there something I can do before I present it that maybe that's a bit of processing? So could I take loads of individual house prices and sort of aggregate them into census areas to make it easier to see patterns? Can I take a whole load of dots and interpolate that data so I get information, or I get kind of estimates about what's going on in the gaps where there's no dots? Or can I take a whole load of bits of data that were collected really close together and average them just to give me some summaries? So is there something I can do that's kind of summarizing or processing my data before I present it? It might just be working out a percentage that then allows you to draw a choropleth map as opposed to draw a series of proportional symbols. But is there something you can do in the kind of the in-betweeny times between collecting your data and just mapping your data? Is there a sort of intermediate process? And the last thing I want to sort of offer up really is a sort of suggestion or an idea or something to maybe do is this kind of planning data presentation sort of grid. And I kind of see you could use this in 2 ways. You can use this to help you plan how you will present your data, or you can use it to critique maybe your friends presented their data and they want a bit of feedback on it. Maybe you're looking at a map that you found in the newspaper, or you've been watching the news and you've gone, oh, that's terrible. Why is that terrible? And you could use this as a kind of framework for critiquing maps as well. So you can use it in 2 ways, so planning your map making and critiquing other people's sort of map making. So start off by thinking a sort of description, really. What are the decisions that have been made in creating that map? And then, well, why? Why did you or the map maker make those decisions? And what I'm trying to encourage here really is sort of deliberate decision making. So not just, well, the symbol is orange. Why is it orange? Because orange was the default color. Well, no, my symbol is blue because it was all about water. And so there's an intuitive link between blue and water. So more blue or the bigger blue thing denotes a greater infiltration rate, or something like that. So really, it's kind of thinking about what decisions have you made or has been made, and what might be the justification for those decisions. And then whatever you do, however you present your data, there will be strengths and weaknesses. There is no perfect map. There's no perfect way of presenting any data, but it's, I guess, really about kind of making sure that those strengths balance out and hopefully outweigh the weaknesses of your data presentation. So you could take a piece of data presentation, you could plonk it in the middle of that grid, and you could start to critique and criticize that data presentation as you've got it. So within this one, it's all about infiltration rates across this area of various land uses or land covers. Infiltration rate is indicated by the size of the circle. Larger circle, greater infiltration rate. Why orange? Well, maybe orange. Well, orange is the default, so I've just used the default color. Maybe orange isn't the best color. Maybe a different color is more useful. Maybe a different symbol would be useful. Maybe some way of splitting apart this little cluster of points here and making it easy to identify that there's 3 there, not one big one, because that they kind of merge together a bit. Is the base map that I've used there useful? Maybe it is, because it lets me see the different land covers I've got there, and so on. So these grids are in these slides. You can get hold of these slides. You can use these when you're starting to think about your own data presentation, be that for your individual investigation, or if you've got a friend who said, have a look at this. What do you reckon to that? Give me some thoughts on my data presentation, or whatever you wish. So kind of use those sort of frameworks, those sort of structures. And that kind of pretty much brings us to the end of our very, very quick whiz through GIS for inquiry. Once you've created your data presentation, hopefully the point of presenting your data is to kind of make it easy to analyze your data. So if you've done some good mapping, hopefully you might be able to kind of stack up various layers of maps, interpret and sort of link between different layers, different data sets that are both your primary data sets and your secondary data sets, and be away. So kind of before we finish, just some kind of way marking, some other links, some bits and pieces. So all of these things link to hopefully kind of things that will be useful. So the particularly this kind of GA methods of presenting fieldwork data, the FSC website for A-level students is our fieldwork website, and there's a GIS section particularly in that, which has loads and loads and loads of how-to guides for bits and pieces of that. Obviously, there's all the awarding bodies, so whichever one of those links or you are working with, look up the right bits and pieces for that. And then if it's particularly support with using GIS that you are after, I would strongly suggest ArcGIS Online, which you can get for free through the Esri UK Schools programme. So if you know that you haven't got that through your school yet, so ask your teachers if you're a student, see if you have got access to that. If you haven't got access to that, get your teachers to go to that link and kind of sign up for that, and make sure that you kind of take advantage of that, because it is pretty much the easiest GIS that is available to school students to use, really, and it is super powerful. So lots and lots of how-to guides on the Esri Schools website, lots of how-to guides on that sort of FSC GIS and fieldwork website as well. And Living Atlas of the World we kind of talked about earlier. If you want more sort of structured how-tos and you want to kind of learn in a sort of structured journey, then that kind of getting started with maps and data sort of little course link is kind of a really good one as well. So that number 3 on the list there. And then finally, we are in GIS week. Tomorrow is World GIS Day. So we kind of timed this talk superbly well, and I don't think we planned it at all, to celebrate World GIS Day tomorrow. So happy World GIS Day for tomorrow.
Thanks, David. That was great. And yes, it's very well timed session today with GIS Day coming up so soon. I hope everyone enjoyed that. I know there's been lots of links throughout the presentation, and the presentation is now live on the GEO website. So if you go to the past events page, you can download David's presentation, and as you can watch this again if you wish to. We'll hang around for a couple of minutes, but I don't think there's any questions at the moment. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed the session, and have a nice evening.